Historically, people who lived with chronic illnesses or physical disabilities often faced interwoven challenges stemming from negative social attitudes, incomplete medical knowledge, limited technology, or the cost of care. These challenges frequently prevented access to appropriate healthcare or services that would have greatly improved their quality of life or provided life-altering opportunities. This video explores some of the significant history surrounding disability rights in order to better understand the importance of accessibility work today at Mid-Michigan College. Almshouses and sanitariums were facilities around the world that housed long-term residents who lived with chronic illnesses, contagious diseases, or severe disabilities. Run by churches or charities, the facilities typically had meager budgets but were generally successful at preventing the spread of diseases while offering a place of rest and recovery for residents. Unfortunately, the efficacy of these facilities declined over time for several reasons. One of those reasons was related to the so-called ugly laws in large American cities between 1867 and 1918. Intended to protect the public from people considered fraudulent, unsightly beggars and to regulate care for addicts or contagious diseases, these laws permitted police to remove and fine offenders on the streets. One Chicago City Code of 1881 stated, "Any person who is diseased, maimed, or mutilated, or in any way deformed so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object, shall not therein or thereon expose himself or herself to public view under the penalty of $1 for each offense." These codes allowed discrimination against disabled people seeking employment, leading to homelessness or begging, then the extra fines for simply existing in public. Anyone who could not afford the fines were jailed and sent to the almshouses or sanitariums. These facilities were soon underfunded, understaffed, and overcrowded, making a safe or supportive environment impossible for residents. This destructive cycle only reinforced the prejudices and discriminatory practices that inspired the ugly laws to begin with. The ugly laws set the precedent on which future discriminatory practices were formed, like denying the disabled an education and enforcing mandatory sterilization. When World War I soldiers began returning from overseas, fissures in these prejudices and practices slowly formed. Americans were suddenly faced with a large population of veterans who had been of sound body and mind before the war, but now lived with physical and emotional traumas. The public was learning that disabilities, including mental illnesses, did not devalue a person, nor were they caused by poor character or a weak constitution. Crucially, the public was discovering the nature of disabilities and how to accommodate them.
This Social Security measure gives at least some protection to 50 million of our citizens who will reap direct benefits through unemployment compensation, through old age pensions, and through increased services for the protection of children and the prevention of ill health.
The next few decades saw meaningful legislative changes to support disability care, like the creation of the Smith-Vest Act in 1920 for vocational opportunities, the Social Security Act in 1935, Social Security Disability Insurance in 1956, and the Architectural Barriers Act in 1968. Another major event that impacted the progress of disability rights came in 1972. Investigative reporter Geraldo Rivera received a tip from a concerned doctor at Willowbrook State School, a sanitarium on Staten Island. ABC News aired his expose called Willowbrook: The Last Disgrace, which brought national attention to the facility's unsafe conditions and neglectful practices.
And I think that particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit, and that the children live in filth, that many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
A lawsuit was filed against Willowbrook by parents of the residents. It cited 12 violations, including confinement of residents, overcrowding, inadequate hygiene and medical practices, failure to evaluate or release residents, and unethical medical research using the hepatitis virus. Their success in the lawsuit marked a huge win for the constitutional, medical, and educational rights of those with disabilities and paved the way for future protections. A year after the exposé's release in 1973, the Rehabilitation Act was passed by President Nixon. At its core, this act outlawed the federal government and their contracted services from denying employment or educational opportunities on the grounds of a person's disability. This act is also what requires publicly funded schools today to provide appropriate and reasonable learning accommodations to students with disabilities and accessible online content. A 4-year delay in its implementation, however, led to multi-day protests and sit-ins at federal buildings across the country demanding Section 504 of the Act be enforced. In 1975, what became known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, was passed, helping the development of programs for early intervention and special education. In the 2020 school year, more than 7.5 million children with disabilities were supported as a direct result of these legislative changes. Though a major step in the right direction, the Rehabilitation Act did not apply to private entities like medical facilities, public transportation, housing, or even grocery stores, so they could still deny accommodations and discriminate based on abilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was proposed in 1988 to ensure protections on a private level, but it was held up in Congress as debates ensued regarding the Act's worth against the financial burden to provide the needed services to the disabled. By March 12, 1990, supporters of the Act and people with disabilities became so frustrated by these debates that they tossed aside their wheelchairs, walkers, and crutches and ascended the steps of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. These powerful images of activists dragging themselves up the 83 marble steps appeared in the news next to the protest named the Capitol Crawl. The ADA finally passed on July 26, 1990, for President George H.W. Bush. Today, the Rehabilitation Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the ADA provide Americans with protections and rights that are far different from the ugly laws of the past. This doesn't mean, though, that the fight for protections and rights is over. Violations of these laws occur every day, and there is no government agency to actively police adherence to regulations. The responsibility to report violations rests on organizations that defend vulnerable populations or with the general public, which requires them to know their rights, understand complex laws, and have the financial means to pursue litigation. Furthermore, recent attempts to reform, defund, or repeal the ADA, Social Security, or the Affordable Care Act would have negatively impacted the protections and funding that have been gained. In performing accessibility work within the Office of Online and Distance Learning today, we aim to limit the after effects of these historic issues and other undue burdens that people encounter when receiving an education. To accomplish this, the following beliefs are embedded in our work. 1. Content should be made with accessibility in mind instead of adding it as an afterthought. 2. Students do not need a diagnosed or active disabilities to have accessible content available, since getting an accurate diagnosis is expensive and time-consuming, and some conditions change in severity over time, while recent diagnoses can mean a lot of uncertainty about what works best. 3. It is not the responsibility of students to find accessible course content. Instead, the Office of Online and Distance Learning or the library can help find or create accessible options. 4. Accessibility is an ongoing project, since the dynamic nature of disabilities and technology means accessibility must be updated or evaluated as needed. And 5. Accessible content benefits all users because students experience a range of abilities and situations, making accessible content beneficial to most audiences. Some of these tenets may seem inconvenient or difficult to manage, but not striving to meet them forces people with a disability to work overtime to be recognized and included. Regardless of the enforcement or funding of accessibility initiatives, MID employees are accountable to students and must actively support them by listening to their needs, adhering to content standards set by the WCAG, and incorporating best practices for teaching and learning into our work. With a fuller understanding of the content in which accessibility work is performed today, we hope you can also adopt these tenets and help us make education achievable for all of our students. Thank you for taking the time to learn about the historical and legal context of accessibility. If you need further assistance, the Office of Online and Distance Learning is available to help, and there are resources provided in the video description if you'd like to learn more.